Welcome, everybody, to Finding Hermes. I hope you're ready to walk through those doors with the God of the mind and find your own higher mind. I hope you're ready to lay your cards on the table and become transparent to the transcendent. And with us on this episode, we have my friend and fellow truth seeker warrior, Moe Bedard. Mo, how are you? And glad to be talking to you on this platform.
I'm doing great, and it's nice to be on the show with you again, Miguel. I think it's been a few years since we last talked with each other. So again, it's an honor to be on your podcast.
Oh man, always glad to talk to you in some way or another. Yes, you've been on Aeon Bide. I have been on Gnostic Warrior. And we both sort of, we're kind of doing the same work, the work of trying to wake up people, the work of Gnosis. But again, as many know, I started this venture because of the high weirdness that happened in 2020. I knew that mental issues were abounding and people were probably searching for alternative means of healing. In a way, your podcast has done both, dealing with the occult, but also dealing with holistic methods of healing. You've balanced this very well since you started in 2009. But having said that, I'm sure 2020 was a pretty wild year for you. So maybe for the audience, you could share what spiritual practices or any type of practices did you adopt and during the whole weirdness that happened? Or what did you have to pivot to any different places, or you just grabbed on to what you knew?
I believe I grabbed on to what I knew. I had some things in my life happen that I believe weren't dealing with the COVID crisis, but it seemed to align with the COVID when it happened. And, it deals with the theme of this podcast and the higher mind and also, this concept of the lower mind. And, this is something that I've had issues with. And, when you go into, the teachings of Gnosticism and you look into philosophy, and then also when you look into Christianity, you start to see these common threads of teachings. And one of those that I kept coming across that reminded me of myself was this, beast-like figure, this Yaldabaoth. And what I notice in other people, Carl Jung, I'm not sure the quote, but it's this thing, what you dislike in other people is most likely what you dislike about yourself. Something like that, right?
Yeah. Projection. We project.
Projection. So in this weird world that we live in, I think sometimes we don't treat people how we want to treat people sometimes, and I believe that the way that we're taught as youngsters, and the way the school system and the way we're fed and the knowledge that we're given, it's almost as if we're our beastly nature, our material nature is to take precedence over our spiritual. So I believe that's kind of what happened to me growing up and having issues with myself. I always felt kind of dualistic, and of course, Gnostics are famous for that, right?
Yeah.
So long story short, I've had issues, as you know, with drug addiction, anger problems in my life. I've been to jail, went to prison. It's been 20 years, since any of that happened, but I've came back and forth to having issues with drinking, as you know, and when stresses or different things happened in my life. But recently I had a son who started going down that road. He was down that road for a while, but he went down the road of methamphetamine. And he's down there. And what happened is he basically changed into this other person, and the shadow that we all dislike of ourselves. And I noticed it in myself and him, and then he fully took on this person, and he changed completely. Like the good part of him is almost gone. And I remembered when I had problems with drugs and drinking, having similar issues, and then seeing this in other people and so forth. So that really made me trying to study and figure out what was going on with us, with me when I would get like that, and why I would always go back and forth. And, that's what brought me along the line back to what I do now for mold and fungi and the counterfeit spirit that I believe that the Gnostics had talked about, and I I believe this is what deals with Tartarus and hell and Archon and the demiurge and so forth. I know I'm tying a lot together, but that's kind of in a nutshell. And so anyways, I studied the methamphetamine addiction, and I found out de facto there's a plethora of scientific studies showing that when you do methamphetamine, you increase the fungal load in your GI tract. You're eating sugar, eating bad, you're not sleeping, you're literally doing everything that mold loves, and they start proliferating your GI tract. And as you know, your GI tract is like a second brain. And so that was really interesting to me because, I was finding out that when I was researching the GI tract, that it actually controls a lot of our emotions and our bodily functions and so forth. And where we don't really have to use this at all, this is just basically kind of controlling it through our vagus nerve into our brain. It's almost like our old reptilian brain. And I'm starting to think it's our demonic fungi brain is what I'm getting at. And this is what's connected to I believe the fungal earth noose Tartarus kind of thing. And the higher mind, the Hermes, would be the higher philosophies. This would be, when you see saints with the halo and Buddhas, and they're participating in the higher mind. They're putting their spiritual above the material. They're using their reason and so forth. So instead of their lower noose, their GI tract, their second brain, all their beastly appetites, whether it's drugs, drinking, food, whatever it might be, controlling this, you control this. And, that's where I found the duality in myself, and having those conversations and always having to say, no, I'm not going to have that drink. Well, no, just have a drink. It's just, this thing. Yeah, just one drink.
And I'll go home.
Exactly. And so,
yeah, please continue.
Yeah. So this is a conversation that I've had in my own head and all my life, where I've had issues with the dark side, the shadow side of myself. And then also I feel the good side that was always seeking to rule me, but was having problems with my dark side. So have you ever had issues with that yourself, Miguel?
Oh, of course. Yeah. I mean, that's the whole duality. I mean, like you said, we have shadow, we have complexes, we have all this things that happen to the past almost create alternative personalities. The Miguel that was beaten up by his dad, the Miguel that was rejected and if you don't deal with them, they'll come up. And then there's the game, like you said, I want to suppress these shadows, these alternative me's, but every time I suppress them, they get stronger. So like you said, it's the game of understanding them with self-knowledge, integrate them, and try to, in a strange way, try to love all these versions of me as hard as I've learned to hate them all my life. So
sure. And I think that's, part of the path. If you're, being a Gnostic now and kind of living in the moment in our past, we each have those different things that happened in our lives, and we could either, continue them with our children and beat our children and do those things. And, if you were sexually abused, you now continue that, or you really dig deep down and you try to think back and forgive these people that hurt you and what happened to them in their lives that made them like that. And if you really start analyzing and going back, it's always these traumas, and we're each kind of carrying them on. And then, if we're parents, we're carrying them to our children. So we got to be really careful, in that aspect, So I believe that we were to transmute that shadow, that darkness somehow, and I feel like with you, Miguel, maybe that's through your work, that you're doing, with Aeon Bide and the books that you've written and the people that you're interviewing, and you're doing work that you love now and maybe getting out of the marketing field and so forth. I feel, those things that we transmute, I got my black belt about 10 years ago, 8 years ago. That was one of the things that I feel that, I transmuted some of my anger into martial arts and learned to humble myself and learned, the way of fighting and to honor and so forth. And I'm a much different person, because of that. So, those are like the things that I feel are necessary. But again, the higher mind and the lower mind, the Greeks had called the nous, and they also believe that there was also a hive mind. And I believe that through the mythologies, like through Gaia and they talked about Tartarus, and Tartarus was the offspring of Gaia. So what's interesting is, Tartarus, it's this slime, it's this black gooey stuff, and you see this black goo, in modern movies and so forth, they talk about, and again, this Tartarus is where people would go to be judged, and they would be in chains, and it's interesting because, those Greek mythologies, when we look at Christianity, and if you look at to the mystical sense, they talk about hell and people are in fetters and chains, this kind of same concept from the Greeks went into Christianity, so it's just when you start tying everything together. And then I realize, when you look at these people that, and myself, when I've had problems with drugs, is I almost turned inverted bad to the point I was somewhat evil. And this evilness can reach different degrees. And then if you look at specifically methamphetamine addicts, it's an interesting study because you'll see the transformation from, say, someone looking like me or yourself to literally in 2 or 3 years their face will just and they'll turn in and they're getting sores all over them, and they feel like and they have these they feel like bugs are eating them, and so I was researching that. Why do they feel like bugs?
Their eyes are possessed, like
correct.
They literally are possessed.
Yeah, so this is interesting to me, Miguel, because the counterfeit spirit and the beast, and then you hear the zombies, and then in the Matrix they talk about some people in the system, and they talk about the people that are part of the system and so forth. And then I believe like these would be kind of the degenerates of the system, but they're still operating, meaning they're still living, and they just seem to have one-track minds. And then if you research again methamphetamines, a lot of them do some diabolical stuff under the influence, and a lot of them were people just like you and I, Miguel. We could have went down that road, right? Easily. So, and I'm going, what's operating these people? What's changing my son to where he was this reasonable man, logical, he had this little dark side, but he was in control, and now it's just reversed, and to the point he's going to left field and hating everybody and lashing out at them and literally nihilistic, suicidal, like that. And then you see this time and time again with other people, and then they commit these crimes, they're killing their families, they're seeing demons, and all these different spiritual apparitions, where are they? They're like in a different almost realm, so all these different things really made me, just take grasp of humanity and what's going on out there and the different degrees. And what I believe, again, is controlling these people is this earth hive mind that operates through fungi, molds. And if you study, again, molds, you look at, I think it's Rupert Sheldrake and Merlin Sheldrake. They have a lot of great studies, but they talk about how the fungi is Earth's internet, and it works symbiotically, literally, with every living creature, and then if you study fungi, we actually live symbiotically. They comprise of about 99% of our DNA, all these different organisms. Yeah. So we have 1%. 1% is human DNA in this body right here.
And the rest of us is like Swamp Thing, basically.
Swamp Thing, correct. So there's this, what I learned, there's a struggle for control of this. And if you look at other insects and other animals, they actually control other animals. They're able to actually inhabit them and control their central nervous system through their vagus nerve and control their brain, where these ants, these wasps.
Yeah. They shoot the spores after they take over. Yeah, that's I'd guess, and that's how archons operate. Take over you and this.
Correct. So listen to this. I wrote an article a little while ago called "Lord of the Flies: Fungi Controls Flies' Minds as it Preys and Affects Other Flies." And I have this theory. This is exactly what humans do. Danish researchers have discovered a genus of fungi that infects and eats flies from the inside out as it controls their minds, creating what they call zombie flies. And then what is interesting is not how this fungus infects the flies, but after they become zombies, they become predators of other flies. So they morph. And so this thing that is really interesting to me, because I see this in humans. I see this with people preying on other people, whether it's through business, whether it's through magic, whether it's through the occult, whatever you might be. You see this in different degrees in our society, where people are preying on one another, whether it's for economic advantage, whether it's for sexual advantage, it's pedophiles, whatever it may be. They're basically trying to control these people. And anyways, if you study black magic, and long story short, you'll find a lot of the black magic deals with controlling these elementals and what they called in Germany Lingusarium. Franz Hartmann talked about, and Lingusarium is fungi. So,
wow, yeah, that's fascinating, because I know you started your work on mold. For the audience, even if you're secular, you don't have to listen to Moe and I. Mold in your house is bad for you. It can give you tiredness, depression. Scientifically, it can even give you schizophrenia. So always make sure that mold, my wife and I are always trying to look for even hidden mold. It can be completely hidden. But what happened with your journey with getting acquainted with mold, as strange as that sounds? Maybe share with the audience. And it's a very touching and powerful story, but it sort of sent you on your path, on your mission today of why you're doing this today.
100%. Yeah, Miguel. It was in about the year 2011. So it was about 2 years where I believe I went down my path as a Gnostic and really seeking to know the truth and, learning to understand things. And when I sought my path, Miguel, I always sought to be like, if I was going to be a Gnostic, I wanted to be like the real deal. I wanted to really I wanted to understand everything that people were talking about. Cause I'd be listening to your podcast, just like somebody might be listening to us and be lost, talking about all these different terms. And I wanted to really understand, and be a scholar of the Gnosticism. And then as I was getting into it, I wanted to, understand the science. Okay. So, but long story short is, 2 years down that journey, my son started getting sick. And what that Gnostic journey didn't entail at that time was really getting into alchemy and medical and biology. It was more of the kind of the Gnostic umbrella. But my son was getting sick, and I was living in a house. I had a business doing really well, overlooking the ocean. Everything was going great, had the podcast, and he just started getting sick more often and more often. And at the time, I, again, was pretty much, I would say, illiterate and ignorant when it came to the medical and anything happening with the body. I basically trusted the system, right? That they would take care of it. And if anything ever happened. So I kept taking my son to the doctor, and he would have the flu or an earache, and they kept giving him antibiotics and steroids and different things. And after time, he kept getting sicker and sicker. So this happened for about two years. And then it got to the point where he actually couldn't walk anymore. And I was desperate because he was in severe pain, and then he was having stomach issues and then head issues. It was as if it was going downhill. And as I was taken to the doctor, they were just kind of scratching their heads, not knowing. So I went on the path of trying to figure out what was wrong with my son, seeking to know and have the gnosis to have a diagnosis, right? To figure out what was up. And that's when I came along various people and groups online talking about mold and toxic mold and their journeys. And they literally were similar to mine and the symptoms that my son had. And, and it made sense because we had water damage and several issues with plumbing overflowing, but we took care of the plumbing, but we didn't take care of the water damage. And that happened over several years. And we even had, fecal matter one time. I remember this wasn't us, but it was coming up out of the front. It was like the trees were clogging the main drain, but literally poop was coming out of every pipe in our house everywhere, and we had a realtor that owned the house in Carlsbad, California. But, he literally let us sit in it, for 5 days, and we're taking video and pictures. Cause then we were like going, hey, something's up. And this is when my son was sick. And I was like, it's gotta be this. That's gotta be this. And so that's when I started looking around and seeing mold and issues. And I'm going, babe, this house has issues. I believe this is what's wrong with my son. And so anyways, we got a mold test. And that's when I heard about, you get a mold test if you think you might have issues, especially if you're renting. I was in a lease. It's only about two months into the new lease. $3,000 a month, is expensive. And I got a mold test, and sure enough, it came back positive in these high levels of toxic mold, Stachybotrys, which is what they call black mold, Aspergillus. All these molds are toxic. They cause cancer. They could kill you. They have mycotoxins. That's really what the toxin that kills people. And the government actually puts these in bombs. There's several governments around the world, and they do chemical warfare with the very toxins that are in the mold that are in our homes. So anyways, I find out that it's mold, and I tell the owner, and I go to the doctors with all this information. And basically they thought I was crazy. They were like, mold, what, you're crazy. Mold's not dangerous, this and that. And okay. So, and then basically they thought I was crazy, and I researched the mold more, and I had all these different scientific studies. I literally had a folder. I had everything. And then doctor after doctor literally just told me it's not mold. There's no way it could be mold. Mold doesn't do this, So we ended up moving out of that house. I broke my lease. We ended up moving to the mountains here, Julian, about 50 miles from Carlsbad. And my son ended up walking the very first day up in the mountains.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So it was like being in the fresh air out from this house, but he ended up not walking like the next day. It was like this thing where he went back and forth. And it's weird. The mycotoxins work on your central nervous system. So they cause these issues where they can cause issues with your pain, where they mimic, arthritis, and, people can't walk, and Crohn's and so forth. And, my son had that same thing, of course, in his stomach, and it ended up being a fungal overload. So if you're having an issue out there, anybody with your stomach, and you're being treated for Crohn's or whatever it might be, take a look at fungus, especially if you had a lot of antibiotics. So we ended up, my life kind of took a turn, and my business and so forth, it went down, and I decided to move to New Mexico, as you know. And it was there in New Mexico that we ended up seeing a mold doctor. There's a Dr. Shoemaker, Dr. McMahon. There's doctors that specialize in mold that you could see, and they're basically they're mold gnostics, right? They understand the science,
right?
They live in there, and those are the people that you want to talk to too. But also they're profiteers as well, so you got to be careful, because you could spend all your money on doctors and seeking treatment. So you got to find a fine line between the two. But what ended up being the saving grace for my son is we found out about hyperbaric oxygen therapy. And there happened to be in Albuquerque, New Mexico, a hyperbaric place at the time called Pro Oxygen. And my son, who was in the wheelchair at that time when we were in New Mexico, once we moved there for a couple months, he started doing the hyperbaric, and he started walking and never got back in his chair.
Awesome. That's awesome. Yeah, I know the story. I followed you when you kept in touch, and it's so awesome what happened. And again, it set you on a path. And when did it go from scientific mold and fungus to the spiritual levels? Obviously, with your research, was the shift really fast, or again, was it a sort of a gradual thing?
It was gradual, but it started with my son. One of the things that my son had experienced were nightmares while he was awake. It was as if he was in this realm between the living and what I would call the dead. And I don't like to say that, but he would describe things that he never saw. We weren't a family that watched, nightmare movies or horrors. I'm not really into any of that stuff, and I don't subject my children to any of that. But that's exactly what he was basically describing, was hell, and people trying to drag him down to this hell, this place. And he was scared, and he was like, he would look at me in my eyes and go, "Dad, please help me. Don't let them take me. Don't let them take me." And this was a reoccurrence, like for the whole 2 years that he was in that wheelchair. And I started to have issues myself because I started drinking, and then I was having issues. And then I would hear this voice, and it was this weird voice that would say, "He's just going to die. Just let him die." This weird thing. Sorry for my language, but I've only shared this with my wife, but it was this weird thing. And I was just like, what's going on? You know, and I was going through this in New Mexico. And at the time I was drinking probably 5 days a week, couldn't sleep. I was just literally researching, you know, maybe sleeping 3 hours a day. And I felt like I was going into this realm. And Albuquerque is a weird place, just so you know, as it is. I don't know if the Native Americans there, but it's a lot of high weirdness happens in Albuquerque. That's where the Sandia labs are. You know, a lot of Black Lodge stuff happens there. They let off the nuclear bomb in the desert near there and so forth. But I felt a lot of that when I was there. It was a weird, dark kind of thing. And so that ended up happening in my head, and I had this battle for about a month with that voice. And then I just decided to talk back like to this voice. I was like, no, I talked like it. No, motherfucker, he's not going to die. Get the fuck. You know what I mean? Yeah, and that was kind of the discussion. And then I go, and I made this decision. I was becoming weak and like giving in and like fearful and drinking and still like, and I was becoming this feeble man. And I just decided that day, I was like, no, I gotta get strength. I gotta be strong for my son. I gotta be, have everything right. And so anyways, I started that day and I never heard that voice again, but it was from then on that his health actually, it went from like doing this to like literally like I could see not a hockey stick, but literally like a mountain, and it was as if like me being his father and being the central brain, it was as if I was equilibrium and I was strong again. And it was like, no, I'm strong, I'm powerful. And no, you're not going to take me and you're not going to take my son. And that's kind of how I started thinking in my head, like this powerful person rather than being more weak and kind of fearful and stuff. And again, that's when it started taking that route. And then I started getting into the mold field and getting certified and then helping other people. And I started to see the same thing happen with other people. And people were actually losing their mind that were previously normal. So this would go along with the schizophrenia, the depression. There's a thing that they call mold rage, where people that were previously normal when they live in these mold homes, they tend to get raged at their loved ones and they change where they're almost like a dual person. Mm-hmm. And so that's really where, the science started tying into the spiritual for me, was when I saw that with my son, who of course never had experienced anything, no drugs, no evil, never been, and he was seeing these same kind of evilness. And then these other people that were also experiencing it, where they were normal people. And I'm talking, people that are teachers, they're police officers, whoever it might be. It was just the gamut. It was the same thing. And it wasn't everybody, but the severe cases, the people their personalities were changing, and it was usually towards the negative. And, the common theme that I keep seeing in all these different people, and of course, is the mold and the fungi, and what I believe it's infecting them, and it's causing them to basically operate almost as if this fungi is starting to try to control their brain, almost like the fleas or the flies and the wasp and so forth.
So you would say it's a sort of a possession. It's the archons possessive, and of course the archons can be very mechanical, insect-like, virus-like. I mean, this is what the Gnostic gospel said. Even Carl Jung thought that addiction was what he called a dark archetype that can. Bill W. and Carl Jung actually had a conversation via letter, and Jung was like, this is like devil possession. It is independent. It's not just your shadow or anything. This is from somewhere else. And we addicts, we open the door for it when our weakness or arrogance or whatever, and it takes over. So you would agree with this, Mo? Or, I mean, we can call it many things, but the effects are the same, What regardless of what mythology or religion we use, the evidence is out there. A world full of addicts and broken souls and people just wasting away.
I do, and I believe, due to the different languages and time and eras when different authors had written, whether they were writing back in Phoenicia or in Babylon, or it was the Greeks, or it was the Latins in Rome, or it was the English, the Old English, or it's now, or it's Carl Jung, and these different types of names that we give to these different entities, I believe it all points to this single entity that we're talking about, whether it's the Archon, the shadow, the devil, Tartarus. I believe it's all dealing with this same thing. And if you really research the teachings, when you get into it, especially when you get into the Greeks and Plato and Hesiod and so forth, they really talk about it. So I wanted to share just a little bit of that real quickly with you.
Yeah, please do.
Okay, so in Homer's Iliad, Zeus asserts Tartarus is far beneath Hades as heaven is above the earth. Hesiod depicts it as a misty Tartarus, stating that it was far below the earth as heaven is from the earth, describing Tartarus as a vast chasm, both dismal and dank, and a place of decay. He states Tartarus is the one first beings have emerged from the creation of the universe and was the opposite of Gaia, Earth. And let me remind you, the science is now stating that fungi was the first literally living entity, and we spawned from that, and sponges in the ocean, and that eventually we came from that. So that's what science is starting to state now. And according to Plato's Gorgias, the souls were deemed impious and unjust by the judges of the dead, were sent to Tartarus and eternally damned. In Phaedo, Plato states that all the rivers run through the chasm of Tartarus and they flow back out and through the earth. So it's interesting, they call it this primordial force. So primordial means first being, and it's this force or this God, and it's the descendant of Gaia, Mother Earth. Okay, so, and then when we go into the Orphic sources and the mystery schools, Tartarus is the unbound first existing entity from which the light and the cosmos are born. So this is where it gets interesting, because I was more along those lines where you were talking about, it was this possession thing, but I believe it's more of a symbiotic type of relationship. Mm-hmm. And this would go more along with the matrix battery. Okay. Yeah. And this is, we're either positive or negative. Your positive is up or your negative is up. We're either contributing to the higher mind or we're turned upside down. And it's more as if the lower mind is controlling us. And that's where I believe the Christian teachings come from in regards to sinning. Because if we look at all the different sins, from slothness to gluttony, all that stuff, I know, just so you know, because I've researched this, when you get obese, your gut grows. And guess what else grows down there?
Fungi.
Fungi, yeah, of course.
Yeah, a whole bunch of stuff under.
Yeah, so my theory is that if you're constantly charging the second brain and training it, okay, whether it's with food, ice cream, whether it's with drugs, methamphetamine, or it's pharmaceutical drugs, whatever, pick your poison, or alcohol, you're training your second brain, your beast, your dog, your shadow to kind of overrule and control your body. So that's why I believe a lot of people, whether, again, it's food. I've had my problems with food addiction. I've had my problems with all these types of stuff that I'm mentioning. And I believe it's this thing in me. And, and again, I started as a youngster growing up in the 70s and the 80s where, it was just like, that's when the microwave generation came in and hot dogs.
TV dinner and all that junk. Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So I believe the science, because of, what's out there, it's known by the Black Brotherhood, as I mentioned, and the Black magicians that seem to rule over us. And if you look at us, I have this theory, or this saying, he who controls the gut controls the mind. So our whole society is based upon doing what I have said, is increasing that fungal overload, whether it's through the antibiotics, the vaccines, or the food and so forth. Of course, we're not made with a gun to our head. You'll go eat that cheeseburger and go eat at McDonald's, right?
Where the marketing comes in.
The marketing, we talked about that, right?
Yeah.
So let's talk briefly about marketing. A lot of people don't understand there's different types of marketing, but essentially marketing, it's black magic. Okay. Mm-hmm. Black magic is getting people to do things they normally would not do on their own. Okay. Mm-hmm. And if we look at marketing in regards to economics and consumerism, it's getting us to buy things that we do not need, right? Or we shouldn't consume. And behind these products, there's a lot of profiteers that are putting different things in these products so they could make more of a profit. You know, if they take out more of the whole food and put this and that in it, you know, they're gonna make more profits, and you know, the executives on the board are gonna, you know what I mean, right? And everybody's happy, and the marketing guy's one of the highest paid guys, right? Yeah,
we get our bonuses, and
correct. And all the while, yeah, and it looks great, and you know, when we look at, you know, America, and it looks like Disneyland, everybody's having fun, eating cotton candy and drinking Cokes, and you know, all the while we're increasing the fungal overload in our bodies, right? And we look at our population, and we have everybody's obese. We have one of the most obese nations, one of the sickest nations, and so forth.
I think 70%, 80% of this country is overweight. And
correct.
And then when the pandemic hit, I think 70% of people hospitalized were severely overweight. I mean, that's
correct.
That's a slaughterhouse. It's like we were sitting ducks. You know?
Sitting ducks, yeah. And most of those people that died from COVID allegedly were people that had problems with their immune system. Mm-hmm. And when you study, you know, fungal infections and parasitism and mycotoxins, that's the first thing it goes to work on is your immune system. It says your immune system is your guard against the archons, right? That's what, you know, if I, you know what I mean? And if that barrier goes down, you know, you kind of go to sleep, you're, you know, like, hey, you know, have some cotton candy, have some vaccines, or some antibiotics, whatever, give it to me. You know what I mean? Before you know it, you might be flipped over, you know, and you might be having problems and rage, you know, and like, what's that voice in my head? You know?
Yeah. Or you're groggy, you're tired, so then they can beam more messages in your head and make worse decisions. Yeah, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy.
It is. And you probably know as I, if you've ever been ill or from your own doing or have gotten injured, it's pretty hard to operate this when this isn't operating well. Do you agree?
Oh, yeah. You have to have a clear mind. I mean, yeah, it's all so attached.
Yeah, like the body and the mind.
If it gets compromised, you know, like a computer, one little virus, one little glitch in the matrix, and
correct,
we're at war.
The virus takes over the program.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and that's what I feel is essentially has happened to humanity is the counterfeit spirit the Gnostics had talked about. You know, that was the duality they talked about. You either had the Holy Spirit or you had the counterfeit spirit. Right. Either one or the other was controlling you. And they had this simple theory. If you did, you know, bad, stupid things, the counterfeit spirit was controlling you. Right. And if it was good, the Holy Spirit. Right. And so the Holy Spirit, and I was like, what's the Holy Spirit? You know, God wants some more of this. You know, right? Give me some more of this, Lord. Yeah. You know, and that's when I started learning more, of course, getting into the Christian mystical teachings, you know, and, you know, I'm not. You know, I grew up Roman Catholic, and then I went away. I believe I became atheistic, didn't believe in God. I thought Christians were hypocrites. And then now that I've come back to Christianity, even though I am a Gnostic, you know, thank God and the Pope, you know, that they're not going to burn me. That's what I know right now, right?
Yeah, nothing.
But in any event, you know, I'm not going to church right now, but I do study the teachings, and I'm beginning to appreciate a lot of what has went into the scripture, you know, and you know, it's just it's really awesome when you start researching that. And you know, that brings you to the Holy Spirit, of course, what the Gnostics talk about, and they talk about in Christianity the holy fire, and you'll be illuminated by the Holy Spirit, you know, and that's what they believe. God and this fire descended from heaven, you know, came down, and that's what illuminated the prophets and the saints, and that's what enlightens the Gnostics and the Buddhas and so forth. And I was like, what's this fire? Where does it come from? That's Moe. Okay. That's like me as a kid. Where's the moon? Where does it come from? You know what?
How do I pay for it to come down? Where do I order it?
It's made of cheese. It's not made of cheese. You're lying, you know? So I started studying about God and wanting to find out about God, because as I mentioned, you know, you hear about God in Christianity and all these different religions, and they talked about God, and, you know, and then the Holy Spirit and Jesus, and this holy fire was connected to God. And I was like, who's God? Like what, you know, and then I started researching, and that's when Moe gets into the ancient teachings and learning from the old philosophers. And that's what I learned. I started really getting into tradition, and tradition, what I believe deals with is studying and going in line with the traditional philosophers, from Pythagoras to Plato to the Hesiod and to now. And you start living in their world, and you'll see like almost like a baton being passed along, even to Carl Jung, all these batons where they were like living in the now, like being what they call Dacian. You're honoring tradition, but you're a modern man. And that's kind of what I call the modern Gnostic, is like, we're honoring these teachings that we've been taught and that we talk about, but we're also applying them to our past now as we look to expand upon them, possibly, if you want to be a positive battery and contribute and be a part of history. And I always wanted to be kind of a part of history and so forth. And so anyways, the God, I had learned that Strabo talks about it. Philo, they consider Jupiter God. And so Osiris, Zeus. If you look at the teachings from these various philosophers and historians, they'll say that they all represented Jupiter, and that's what they felt was God. And when you research Jupiter, and because of science now and the science we have, you'll start researching these different things. You'll learn as above, so below, and on Jupiter is phosphorus. And that's where we get the chemical energy phosphorus. It's the only planet, and it's that eye, the red eye. Yeah. Right. So phosphorus happens to be, interestingly, the alchemical energy that fires our DNA. It's what makes us fire. If you don't have any phosphorus, you're not operating. And it was Harvey Spencer, the leader of American Rosicrucians. He was also a member of the Memphis Mizraim Masonry. He had talked about that people that were dumb had low phosphorus up here, basically, and they had more down here. Okay, so that goes along with the second brain theory. So if you're transmuting, that phosphorus, and you're really using your brain and using reason and contributing to the nous, to the matrix, or whatever you might want to call it, you're basically raising that energy, okay, from what they call the chakra. Again, I went through all that stuff before, the chakras. What the hell's the chakras, right? That's just, in our body, that's our glands. So your root chakra is down here, right here. Right. So if you're concentrated, so if you're concentrated down here all the time in your root chakra and your energy down here and sex and all your emotions and your gut and everything, that's where you're going to be centered. But if you transmute it up here a majority of the time, it doesn't mean you got to be a monk and live in the mountains and never have sex again. Okay. No. And it doesn't mean you got to be this perfect being. That's what people don't understand as well. When you become somewhat awakened, you don't have to be this perfect Jesus. But in any event, that's when I believe that you transmute and you connect to the holy fire and to the nous, to the mind. And that's where, Jupiter's up there. And that's where I believe we're kind of feeding this mind. And if you get into the different philosophies, they believe that the mind actually isn't here. It's out here. So
Aquinas thought our mind wasn't in us, or we were inside the soul. The body just the body was a excretion of the soul, of the nous, if you would.
Yeah, exactly. And basically this mind was kind of like outside of us, like a sphere, like we're almost in this bubble, like it's like we're this computer plugging in. And then I feel that there's also as I had mentioned, the earth nous, what I call the little nous sometimes, which seeks to control the big nous, right? It seeks to, right? Yeah. So, I believe, again, we live symbiotic. So you'll research scientists now that study microorganisms and so forth. And, they believe, of course, that we live symbiotic because they are part of who we are. And there's plenty of people that are living to old age. Guess what they don't do, Miguel?
What's that?
Methamphetamine. No, just kidding. No, they don't. A lot of them don't really sin too much.
Oh, of course.
There are not a lot of sloths and gluttons and stuff like that.
No.
Yeah, and it's interesting is, one of the oldest people living here in California, and it's in America, actually live in, I think it's Rancho Cucamonga, and they're from the members of the Church of Latter-day Saints. And they're pretty, of course, not everybody's a saint in the church, but for the most part, they're living in the community trying to adhere to the Christian precepts. So that's where I believe, if you don't sin per se, and that would be the health industry, right? Being healthy and, don't be a sloth and, get some rest and, but get some, So I believe that if we do that, we have more of a chance of controlling this and not having the archons, the fungal noose controlling this, and then if you take something like methamphetamine, these drugs, you're going to take a bullet train to hell, probably.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh my God. Yeah. And so what advice would you have for people to dealing with fungus or the whole idea? I mean, you started a business cleaning people's houses. And when you started, I was like, this is, again, I always took this mold very seriously, but what is some advice for people just every day?
Yeah. So the next thing, the godliness is cleanliness. Mm-hmm. So I think there's something there, and that needs to be in every aspect of your life, from your food to your environments and so forth, especially, now in this modern day, 2021, how much time we spend indoors. We got to make sure that our environments, our homes are free, or our apartments where we're living, of mold, especially, they feed on dust, they feed on our skin, so every day we shed millions of skin cells, and guess what's eating them and feeding upon them everywhere around? Yeah. It's a true story. So, and it's gross, but if you start learning about it and understanding and keeping clean, you'll notice a huge difference. So if you're having issues with your health, you're not sure what's going on, I would definitely start taking a look around your property, whether you live in an apartment or a house, and start looking for mold. Maybe this podcast is, you remember water damage and you didn't take care of it. And shortly thereafter, some illness issues started happening. Or maybe you just moved into a new property and you started getting sick several months after, and it's really unexplainable. Those are really telltale signs that there's something in your environment. And I would contend that it's mold in the walls, or from water damage in your sink, or something hidden. Could be in your HVAC system. Crawl spaces are a huge issue, and I know you're on the East Coast. Basically, about 30 to 40% of your indoor air actually rises from your crawl space. So if you have mold in there on your beams and so forth, which a lot of people do, because that dirt, basically, just so you know, dirt is about 30 to 40% active mold at all times. So if you were to take a vial of dirt and take it to a lab, there would be 40%, 30 to 40% would be active mold, because that's what makes dirt. So if you think about it, when everything dies and it goes there, the leaves and the bones and so forth, that's basically what makes that. And then what makes the black goo within the earth? I mean, that's all the dead bones of the dinosaurs, and we're making our cars, driving them. You know what I mean? And then we're making our beers with them, right?
Yeah, definitely are. And
so, yeah. And so again, if you're having issues with your health, I learned too, as we get older, especially if you drink, the more fungi that you put into your body, the more that it's going to eat you. So you're going to start getting health symptoms. So if you start getting athlete's foot, arthritis, different types of things, unexplainable pains, and then you happen to be drinking the very thing that's probably eating you in that very part of that body that it's hiding, just like it would in a wall inside of your home. So, eat clean, eat whole foods. I'm very big on eating whole food, organic for the most part. Trying not to eat a lot of sugar. Sugar is how we make alcohol and feeds the fungi. So if we put it into our body, right, and the more you put in your body as far as a certain thing, the more it seems to train it. So try to control your body and control what you put into it, and then control your environment. I recommend a cheap HEPA filter, a Germ Guardian or something for your house. That way it'll filter the air. So some people can't move. They might have an issue and they're scared. You can get a filter for $100 on Amazon, or $90, and that'll help filter your air even when you have mold. And you could actually use stuff like hydrogen peroxide and fog your home with a fan. And you have a spray bottle, and you could just, and it's going to take you a while, but you literally will kill all the spores everywhere around you and in your house, and they'll be dead.
Awesome.
So, yeah.
Great advice. Yeah, it's it's a busy universe out there. So much going on beyond our eye. And I think the lesson you're showing us is knowledge is power. The more you know, the more the solutions will come, or the solutions will be downloaded to you. So, and what about for spiritual practice? I guess, again, it's self-knowledge, right? We're all different, we all got to find our own practice.
We do. And where I believe that practice happens is up here, Miguel, in our minds and in the higher mind and the reason. And then it's really, I believe, practicing gratitude and grace and being thankful for what you have. So those would be some of the rituals that I do. I'll get down on my knees, and sometimes I'll cry and I'll thank. And I try to thank God, the Lord, my ancestors. I try to pay tribute to my ancestors. If you research spiritual entities and so forth, and daemons and Socrates, they believed in guardian spirits. And if you really research that, those would be your ancestors. So I believe that we're here to honor them in a sense, but also to live our lives and to be good people and to contribute. And it's an honor to live and to be in the flesh rather than to be a curse. So I'm not one of those Gnostics that thinks that this is an eternal hell and it's a prison. I believe that it's a labyrinth and there's a way out, and through gnosis and knowledge, that through your path, that you could use that to exit the labyrinth and go to heaven. Holy fire, Lord, thank you.
Jupiter Ascending. Jupiter. I think that's a movie.
Yep.
Oh, well, that's great. Really appreciate you sharing this wonderful information, because again, it's so things that people don't know about, and then connecting them to addiction and all these things. It opens up a lot of vistas, and I'm very happy that you've gone down this path. I watch your videos, read your blog posts when they come, and again, it's great because you'll be talking about occult symbolism and the Freemasons, and then we'll get something on holistic health. So you keep it very varied.
Thank you.
And you've definitely you've been through this struggle, and I'm sorry about your son, but I'm happy about your other son, and it's just families. I mean, I'm sure I guess that's the last question is, as parents, we want to blame ourselves for the sins of our sons, but we really can't, an addiction is an addiction. And there is a lot of mystery, even no matter how much research we do.
It is, and that's when I really realized as I started going down my path, and how important it is to be a good father and a good role model to the people around you, and especially to your children, and when I had my son, this is my second marriage, and I have 3 kids. I have one on the way, Miguel. I'm going to be 50 in another one.
Congratulations, awesome.
Thank you, man.
You'll stay young. I mean, my youngest is 5 years old, and I'm like, these little monsters keep me young when I think about it.
Correct. And they make me want to live longer and to be a good person, and so I gotta tame my beast. I gotta control my shadow and be there for my children, and walk my daughter down the aisle when she gets married, and be there for their children. And, I believe that, if I institute some of the things that I had said, and I preach, and I try to practice those, that I can live and reverse possibly some of those sins and those things that I did to my body, so I could live, to be in old age, and to have the children and enjoy the grandchildren. So
amen. Yes. And sometimes the only way to lead is by example. That's what we'll be remembered for down the line.
Yeah.
Our dads did this, our dad showed up to this. And
and let me touch on the one thing I forgot to touch on, what you had said, which is important, because I actually went through it this past year with what you had stated about not blaming yourself for, the path or, the choices that your children make, because you naturally are going to do that. And I do believe that the things that we do when we're raising them affect them. And of course, part of what my son is going through, he's, 30 years old right now, is part of how I was. I had him when I was 18, at a time that I was, and I was in, I went to jail and I went to prison when he was young. So I believe some of those things did affect him, But there's this thing that we have to do, as we go along our path, and each one of us is different. And some of us sometimes never see that, is him understanding what I went through and my father. And, like you had went through a rough childhood. My father was an alcoholic. I had no teachings. I was drinking when I was literally 11 years old, doing drugs in my bedroom when I was 13, hard drugs, and selling drugs at a young age and doing things that I shouldn't have did. But in any event, it was these different things that, happened to my dad, and he became an alcoholic, and then he lost his dad when he was a youngster. And, just this thing that carries on, but you got to learn to forgive. That's the thing, I believe. When you learn to truly forgive someone in your heart, whether that's someone you love or someone that's wronged you, and you look at that person and you realize that they were hurt and that they're doing it usually out of that, and that, people can change, and that I am not that person that I was 30 years ago, 40 years ago, and that I am continuing to change and trying to be a better person. So I believe that, we need to forgive ourselves and not take it too hard, and understand, that everything we do matters, everything we say matters, and try to be the best people we could be. And especially if we're fathers and mothers, and try to be, those good role models.
Well said. Yeah, very well said. And thank you for sharing. And it's been a great conversation. So for the audience, I'll have it flashing underneath and on the show notes. But for those that are just listening audio, where can they find out more about you and your work, Moe?
Sure. You can go to gnosticwarrior.com. That's where I write about the different types of stuff that we were talking about today. I do have a business in Southern California. I do help people. If you call me, if you have some questions, especially if you have young ones that are sick, or you're very sick yourself, I'll help anybody over the phone. But if you need help with mold, I'm in San Diego County or Southern California. I have Mold Safe Solutions is my website. I do mold inspections and mold remediation, and I'm the real deal. You're going to want to have someone like me go to your house rather than some other company. So thank you for the opportunity, Miguel. It's been an honor again. I appreciate you, bud.
Oh, man, always a pleasure having you on, and I'm sure we will talk again on your podcast or my other podcast. So we're on a journey of self-discovery, and we're just getting a little bit wiser, and that's a good thing. So, but thanks for coming on Finding Hermes, Moe. Really appreciate it.
You're welcome, Miguel. Take care, bro.
You
Bye.
too. And there you have it. And I hope the transition wasn't too fast, but Cronus waits for no man and certainly keeps devouring his children. Anyway, great conversation as always with Moe. I've always loved his intersection of science and spirituality, which always brings new insights into this world that we live in. So check out more of his articles and podcasts. And I'm sure to some of you, the information might have been a little stomach turning, perhaps gives a new meaning to trust your gut, especially when your gut is comprised, as science says, of about 2 pounds of microorganisms helping you digest. But as they say, or as the Gospel of John says, the truth will set you free. But it might make you a little nauseated at first. But in the end, it will also make you healthier spiritually, mentally, and even physically. And that's a good thing, even if it's a little disturbing. Like Jesus says in the Gospel of Thomas, first you will be disturbed, and then you will be amazed. And hopefully filled with good food and a good diet and good health. Our talk also reminded me of Irenaeus himself. In the 2nd century, he did say that the Gnostics were popping up across the Roman Empire like mushrooms. So the old battle axe himself, the old heresy hunter, even had a concept of the dominant force of fungi. Of course, I would say that he got the archons wrong because he himself is the archons. And the Gnostics were simply appearing after storms and appearing in the darkness and the edges of town as they always did. But interesting quote by Irenaeus. Another point I thought about during our conversation, and this is something I've been presenting and stressing for a while now in both Aeon Byte and Finding Hermes, is the idea that our minds are legion. We are all just disassociative fragments of consciousness. We are complexes, shadow, trauma material, program personas, all floating or under the umbrella of what we think is our true selves. So there really is no authentic Miguel or you or anything like that. And it's a matter of integrating it in order to really bring about the unification of the psyche. And this has been stressed by such guests as Bernardo Kastrup, Lance Owens, Rachel Connerly, and so many others that I've talked to. So with this in mind, I think we're finding out that our bodies are even legion, that we are not comprised of this flesh we think we are, but that we actually comprised of various microorganisms. And we're not even, our bodies aren't even a farm. It's sort of a symbiotic thing where much of what we are is all these creatures feeding on us, existing in us, helping us work our internal biology. It's, well, as above, so below, right? I mean, if the archons are above feeding off of us in the universe and feeding off of the divine essence here trapped in the material world, well, our bodies are also a universe where those little archons, their representatives, are, well, feeding off of us right now. So what we are is not who we think we are, even in the body. We are legion, both in mind and body. Pretty interesting news, but again, gnosis is not just seeing reality or finding out who we are, but it's also very important we start out by finding out what we are not. And all this mess and this stew of complexes, this stew of legion, we can sort of remove what we are not and truly dig in to find our divine spark, that shard of infinity, that pure untainted consciousness, and begin tapping into that as we individuate and bring all the other pieces of who we are together. And with the body too, explore your body. As I've said before, the body is simply an expression of the soul. It is the language of the soul. Plotinus said that the body is an excretion of the soul, and it can be useful, but we have to see it. Well, we have to see it for what it is. We are legion. The truth will set you free, and it will disturb you and even make you a little nauseated, but better than living a lie. Definitely better than living a lie. Our talk also reminded me of Grant Morrison's Nameless, a 6-part comic book series that, well, it's in the genre of cosmic horror, very Lovecraftian and very Gnostic in many ways. I don't think many people read it, and the few people that have read it that I know didn't like it. I think the reason many have told me is that it takes a very David Lynch Gnostic sort of approach. The narrative isn't always linear. In fact, there's many narratives that flow in and out of each other. So it gets very surreal at times. And it's also, again, it's very visceral, very intense. I enjoyed it. Like Cormac McCarthy's stories, or again, the Gnostics or David Lynch, it seems it toys with nihilism, but at the end, there is that divine spark, that intervening holy divinity, or that intervening holy piece of information that is salvific and redeems the entire mess of narratives, the legion of narratives, if you would. So yeah, I would highly recommend Nameless, but like finding out the truth, you will be disturbed for a while. Part of the theme of Legion is that God is both a cosmic mind parasite, but he's also a mental mind parasite that exists in every human being. And when God needs something really specific, a specific quest or mission, he will completely take over the mind of a human being or several human beings. And this manifests as, yes, fungi start to come out people's mouths and eyes. People go from being normal zombies that most of us are in this world to complete zombies, doing the quest of this cosmic mind parasite in his mission of creating a total collective world of creatures that worships him. Very much like the Night King in Game of Thrones, whose mission is to totally suppress awareness, totally destroy awareness, so that we are one mechanical collective, this colony of fungi and flesh that does exactly what the Night King wants, or what the mind parasite and nameless wants, this cosmic being that came to conquer. So interesting insight that I saw, and check out Nameless if you can. So thanks for being here. There will be more Finding Hermes soon. I will try not to skip any months and keep bringing you those alternative means of mental health and regular health so that you can access Hermes, the god of the mind, walk through those doors you need to walk through, lay your cards on the table, and become transparent to the transcendent. Thank you, and we will see you soon.